tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. I'd like to ask permission of the Theras and the Sangha to say a few words on Dhamma. Extend my greetings to the lay people this evening. Tonight is the 8th day of the waning moon. It's what we call our half moon observance night. This very lovely way we have of keeping the old lunar calendar. Gets a little bit confusing at times. 8 days and then 7 days, and next week it's going to be 6 days. But generally, we get it in time, or we use the Abhayagiri calendar. Just look, it's the easiest way. And then come together in this time-honored fashion. Goes back right to the Buddha's time and beyond that even. The Uposatha, or as I understand it, the Upavasatha, means dwelling close to. Something like in the old Indian tradition, it was a day of dwelling close to the sacrificial fire, the full moon and new moon, so to dwell close to. And so the Buddha, in the way he did, taking Indian traditions or rituals, sacred, holy, superstitious rituals, and empowering them with, we could say, a more psychological or spiritual or transformative or practical at times, pragmatic, communal sense or communal power. Made it the time for the monks to come together, recite the rules once the monastic code was being laid down. At first they'd just come and just sit quietly together all night, very nice as well. Then in time became the evening for reciting the monastic code. And then it's something in our Ajahn Siripanno tradition he made much of. It's quite a difference from what I understand from the other forest traditions, that we don't just take it as a monastic day, where we every 2 weeks usually it's the day of the rule recitation. This is the half moon. In some forest monasteries, it's not really observed at all. You wouldn't even know that it was the half moon day. And certainly there's nothing with the lay people. Whereas in Luang Por Chah's monasteries, the lay people come in the morning, take the precepts, and that's having offered food on alms round, and then having brought more food to the monastery and cooked the meal, and then take the precepts, and then stay all day. And it's the time when the monks, there's interaction. It's that time where the monastery provided and played the role of being a community center, a place of refuge. And just been reading about Luang Por Chah, he would encourage it, saying it was a really good practice to come. He'd say there are 30 days in a month. So that makes in a month there's roughly 4 what are called one prat, a holy day or venerable day, or prat also means monk. So he said 4 days a month, just offer that to the monks, or offer that to cultivating spiritual life. Because if every day is just an ordinary day, then what's that going to be like? How are we going to grow? So he said just 4 days, and more than that, he said more than that, no one would want to do it. It'd be too much. So it's the middle way, 4 days a month. So in a year, that's a lot. So that was the way of training. And then the monks, as you know, we still keep it here, as well as the interaction with the lay people and the sense of it being a greater community. Sangha in the bigger sense, then the taking up of the late night practice as well, and then the late night Dhamma talk, often not so much of a formal structured talk, or in the morning be shorter, but at night, as you've probably heard or read, it could go on and on and on, rambling themes, stories, anecdotes, tales. So that won't happen tonight. Often many, many hours long. We start and it's like 9 o'clock, so, well, you know, midnight, tea's at midnight, so we definitely go at least until then, and maybe if we're on a roll, tea can wait till 1 or 2, you know. That was the way, apparently. It's fun, it's sort of like, you know, we're going to do an all-nighter anyway, so whatever gets you through the night. And it's just a really warm tradition. And the Buddha with the monks, that was also the tradition of discussing Dhamma. There's one lovely sutta where you read about monks practicing, kind of like a small group of hermits. But then and they basically hardly have any interaction, hardly talk. Even when they have to do group chores, they just make a little sign with the hand and call each other over to help and do the setting up the hall and going on arms round. Just do it all very quietly, intuitively. But then every 5 days they meet and discuss Dhamma all night. So it's definitely a theme, both the late night being a time of practice, Dhamma discussion, group discussion, and then this sense of, now in the Ajahn Chah tradition, the Sangha and the lay people, you know, helping each other, two parts of a whole, and it creates what's called a sasana, a teaching. The sasana is more complete. You could have the abstract philosophy, the Dhamma, but then it also needs what's called sasana, watu. It needs the material objects, as well as the actual, some of the ceremonies and the way we do things, but then it needs what's called the sasana pugala, the people, you know, the staff members or the participants to make what makes a religion, or what makes a philosophy, or what makes a whole complete path of practice, an assembly. So it's lovely when we talk about Observance Day, you know, we're observing. What are we observing? We're observing. It's a complete path of practice with sila, undertake precepts, dana in the morning, and many other ways you can offer service, generosity, cultivating samadhi, cultivating paññā. This evening, I thought to say a few words on this aspect of simply put, of Kamma and Cetana, what we call Kamma and intention. Cetana, this word which means intention. And there are so many ways we can talk about Buddhism, and generally looking around, I'm familiar now with many of you, long-term dedicated practitioners, and these days there's a lot of study being done, people are reading, there's wonderful translations. And so we all probably have our ways that we would say put our finger on, well, what makes this special for us, or what's the teaching? How do you sum it up? And the Buddha himself gave simile of the elephant. Most of us would say, well, the Four Noble Truths, such a special teaching, sums it up. Or something like 3 characteristics for those people a bit more technical, and next level up would say, oh, it's dependent origination, unique to the Buddha, something like that. Whatever, we have our way, and so many unique features. But a very simple one for me has been understanding or deepening my understanding of this principle of Kamma. What does it mean? How did the Buddha teach it? How does it work? And then, more importantly, then how do I develop it in my life in a way that is of benefit? And much of what I say, I'm sure you'll have heard already. But such a key principle, a bit like the Four Noble Truths. We just kind of keep coming back to it again and again, and different angles and different perspectives, and then understand it more in our life. So, simply put, we're all familiar with the word Kamma probably, and the principle of Kamma, which can be so simply summed up as doing good leads to good results, doing unwholesome, bad leads to bad results. So it's a law of a causal law, cause and effect, but also very much grounded in an ethical principle, an ethical law of causal effect that we're talking about, where there's such a thing as wholesome causes, which will bring about wholesome results. And we gauge that, or we measure that, or label that, determine that, depending on the extent to which we experience dukkha or not. It's a very simple principle. And I'm sure Kamma was a word very, very much used and familiar in the Buddha's time. But from what I understand, this statement the Buddha made at one occasion, Cetana ahang bhikkhave kammang vadami, which means, monks, I declare that Cetana is Kamma. So Cetana is often translated as intention, volition, will, urge, and then so many ways, really, when you start thinking about it and see how it's used. I mean, the verb is really to think. Jinteti means to think. And it's bound up with the word citta, the mind. So really, it's so many aspects of mental doing. Volitional mental doing, our intentions, our urges, our volition, our will. And this is what the Buddha said, this is Kamma. But Kamma comes from the word doing or action. So I think it would have been a very surprising statement for a lot of people then, that action, the active part of our actions, of body, speech and mind, is the mental part of it, the mental component. Effectively, that which subtly precedes body, speech and mind is another mental thing, which he called cetana. It's like the impulse that sets the process in motion. So the Buddha said, I declare that intention is Kamma, because having intended, one acts through body, speech and mind. And actually, thinking about it, that's what we find at the beginning. That's what the Buddha was setting out in the Dhammacakka Sutta, right at the very beginning, this principle of the middle way. I was thinking about this. There's a middle way between sensuality and mortification, two things which basically deal with the body or deal with the physical realm. And this obviously would have been, for the most part, the thinking that you have some kind of build-up of bad kamma, well, you have to do something to your body to eliminate your old bad kamma, or you have to find pleasure through the physical body, through sensuality. The Buddha says there's a middle way, a new way, which entirely avoids that. So that's the first clue. This is a new way, an alternative way. So it's going to be middle way, mental way, or middle way is the way of intention. And then very quickly, in the sutta, this is basically his first teaching, it's basically outline, it's like his manifesto. This is what my teaching is. He's talking to the group of 5. Look, I'm going to teach you, you can get this. Having studied, you'll be liberated too. It begins, the middle way is this very eightfold path, beginning with samma ditthi, right view. It's a mental thing. It's not something to do. It puts the mental understanding, right view, right perspective at the forefront of the teaching. So it's cultivating, again, very much bound up with intentions. And then secondly, right intention or right thoughts. So it's the heart of this. So just to talk a bit about intentions then, is the word we use. It's been coming up a lot for the Sangha because we've been studying our monastic training rules. And in a sense, there are many levels. There are many levels of it, and it's something which I think is useful to understand. I've certainly been thinking about it over these years. So the first level which I could point to regarding intention is a very obvious one. The way we use the word is to do something intentionally or willfully. So the easiest way to think of that is deliberately as opposed to accidentally. So I think it's really obvious, isn't it, for most of us, that if we do something deliberately, there's sort of more karma there. Accidentally, we understand, oh yeah, that's not karmic, certainly in the Buddhist sense. And obviously it comes up a lot when people do things like accidentally kill insects, or you're sweeping, or you're driving your car, or you're doing anything basically that somehow is going to kill an insect. Especially in Asia, for example, you can hardly literally do anything. And it's really well understood. There's no intention. Your intention, your deliberateness is not to kill an animal. It either happens completely accidentally without you realizing, or it's just part of a process that you're doing. There's one kind of level. So we understand it when people take the precepts in Thailand. It's always translated as the intention to refrain from taking living beings, or the intention to refrain from taking that which is not given. So that word cetana is put in there in the translation to make it clear that you do things by accident, but what we're dealing with, so the first level. Another way we use the word intention in English is like, what was your intention? Would be more, can be explained by, say, motivation. And that's something which is also obviously important. You can have wholesome motivations and unwholesome motivations. But again, we have to be careful with that, because I think there's an old expression that good intentions or good motivations can be the road, line the road to hell, or the road to hell, something like that. So you can do lots of harm thinking you're doing something very good. You can be motivated by your own understanding of what your motives are, and make a huge mess with your life, with somebody else's life. And we see it playing out in the news all over the world. Most people think they're doing a good thing. And you ask anybody who's often doing really horrible things, for them their motives are good. And religion is certainly one of the things that can lead people to do a lot of harm, but from some kind of good motive. It's like, I want to help somebody, I want to bring them the good news, or I want to, or it can be your commitment to some kind of cause or political agenda or anything, or righteousness. There's that on one level. People don't kind of literally think they're harming people or doing something wrong, but the bigger picture is it's good. So we have to be careful with that, but that's another level of intention. So again, the Buddha luckily pointed out very clearly what are wholesome intentions, things like non-harming. So to harm will never be, you can never have a wholesome motive for harming something. And never have it's not like, well, my brother needs some money, so I'll rob a bank, to help my brother. Isn't that a wholesome thing to do? That's never going to be a wholesome thing to do. But we have these wholesome motives generally, yes, to help people, to do things for the right reasons. But we have to be very, very careful then. It's grounded in the bigger context of, is there harming possibly involved? Is there some kind of inappropriate activity that's going to ultimately be unskillful? But intention also on the much more subtle level, it could be more described as our psychological urge in the context of greed, hatred and delusion. And this is what we talk about a lot when we discuss the monks' training rules. But again, for lay people, it's also very important. This is where we'll begin to see more and more teasing out in our lives, well, what really is wholesome or unwholesome, what really is good kamma or not good kamma, is to use this very simple framework of lobha, dosa, moha, greed, something that's that desire, that I want, that pulling something in. It can be coarse material things, sensual, sexual, or just wanting something to be going your way, this kind of more subtle. Dosa, the aversion, the I don't want, I don't like, pushing away. And then moha, delusion, which is, because of its nature, harder to see, harder to figure out. And one thing's important to understand with these intentions around greed, hatred, and delusion is that, in a sense, they're all part of delusion. There was a sweet lady here a few days ago after the meal. She came up just in the breezeway talking, and just a quick question. She said, "I just got a quick question, and I've eliminated greed and delusion, and I just want to work with anger. And can you just give me a tip? How do I, in anger?" So it's kind of sweet, it's kind of fun. So I said, "Wow, you eliminated greed, eliminated delusion. What do you mean?" Said, "Well, I just kind of, a bit old now and fed up with the world. I don't want anything in life very much, so that's gone. And delusion, I understand, there's what's right and wrong. The Buddhist teachings are really good, so I'm not deluded anymore. But I'm just so angry all the time, and just so angry." And so, it's so important to understand that really these things are very much bound up with one another. I suggested a few things to her, and but also wanted to point out that they're not really separate things. It's not really that, you've got desire for things, and then you've got aversion to things, and then there's this strange thing called delusion. That really, that aversion itself, the anger. I said, well, if you get angry, does it arise sometimes because you don't get the things you want? She said, yeah, that's it. I just don't get what I want. I said, well, there's still some desire there, really, isn't there? So it's, it kind of makes for interesting. It's good for people to see that, just how linked they are. And then, of course, delusion then, as Dhamma practitioners, it really goes all the way. It takes us right to, not just delusion around, muddled thinking, being dull and making mistakes in life and maybe putting our foot in it, but really right all the way to the fundamental delusion of perceiving of an entity and something where there's merely a process. So that's really the extent to which in our lives our intentions or our thoughts are still somehow grounded in greed, hatred, and delusion. It's very, very subtle. So to be really, really pure in our lives, pure in our body, speech, and mind, I think is a very high level. But the thing is, we can really understand the principles and work on all of these levels, making sure that at least when what we're doing, we have clarity around doing things intentionally, rather than not really knowing what we're doing. Getting clarity around our motivations, knowing that we have wholesome motivations to be kind, to be generous, to be free, from craving, or to live a good life, right livelihood, all of these things. But also being careful that we're not taking the idea of intentional motivation and just thinking, well, whatever I do that's in line with what I want to do, with what I think is good, then that can always be good. And then working more subtly on greed, hatred, and delusion, these intentions, inclining the mind away from greed. And then something like that, seeing more and more, well, what exactly is it? Being more and more sensitive to that feeling in the heart when you're just drawn towards something. And it can be ever so subtle. It's not just the coarse material things. It's so easy to, look at the material world and talk about, the world today is so materialistic, the greedy, the politicians, the business peoples, the corporations. But, and to feel, well, I'm not greedy, we're living righteously and trying to do our bit for the environment and all these kind of things. Yet nevertheless, there's so many more layers to look at, to see, I want this, I want that, I'm motivated by this, I'm drawn to that. And then the flip side, when you don't get what you want, or getting the things you don't want, greed flips to aversion, to anger, to negativity, to unhappiness, to dukkha. And it's grounded in, not seeing the process so clearly, but then ultimately the bigger picture, still somewhere there thinking there's the me, myself, and I, the me and mine. So creating then new new intentions, whole new ways of thinking, new pathways, new neural pathways or new psychological pathways, new of body, speech and mind. And so this is what the Buddha called Kamma, very different to the kind of superstitious purification rituals, very different to the external physical world of doing or of action. So it comes back to right view, or the starting point of another way, which you could say, well, what sums up the Buddha's teachings? Dhammapada verse 1, mind is the forerunner of things. Mind is the chief mind made of things. Again, putting this whole realm of experience, this whole world of ours, right into the mental court or the mental realm. Not one which is bound up with physical entities or a physical everything, from a cosmology to a social structure to any of the things which generally people would look to or cling to as the realities and the world. The Buddha always putting it into the mental realm. And why this is so key is obviously then is that this gives us this is literally the key to our freedom then. If it's the case then that our actions, that really the efficacy, what we call the karmic efficacy, or the potency, or the power of our actions lie in our intentions, well, this is something we can all work with. Intentions go beyond status, age, sex, race, whatever. We can all right here, right now, begin or carry on the process, hopefully then, of inclining the mind, creating intentions, creating thoughts, volitional thoughts, it's another word for intentions, thinking in the right way, inclining our mind. So learning basically what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial. And then arousing, you could say, the energy or the enthusiasm or the intention, again, keep coming back to this word, the cetana, the attitude, to do something about it by basically thinking in a new way. And so what might seem, quite obvious and quite simple then, just becomes a whole new horizon, or a whole new world of opportunity or potential then. Given though that we talk about delusion and being kind of mired in this samsaric soup, where do we start? It can sometimes be a bit daunting. And so this is where it's wonderful to have the Buddhist path and so many teachings taught again and again and again and again. And so one key place to start, which we can all do, and the Buddha called it the forerunner of right view, is this expression, yoniso manasikara. Yoniso manasikara, work of the mind which goes to the root or the source. The yoni is literally the womb. It goes right to the womb. Again, I'm sure it's got its connotations or its origins in ancient Indian or Vedic thought. The Buddha saying, we'll go to the source of things. But we're not talking about some kind of creation myth. The source of all things, you go to the root of things. It begins with avijja and then turning it around. So we go to where is the lack of wisdom and then finding wisdom. So yoniso manasikara, work of the mind which goes to the root or the source, we translate as wise reflection. You have to look at the causes and conditions. Where do these things come from? What's this going to turn into? And basically that's you could say the beauty of being a manusa, the human being or the true human being. What distinguishes us from animals? We love animals, respect animals. But as human beings, we are different. We have the power to reflect in this way, just to be able to undertake 8 precepts, which gives you a framework for, like a container or a vessel for spiritual growth. That's something which is very, very powerful, these intentions which you're able to create, ways of inclining our mind in a new direction. So it all begins with wise reflection. We've got this capacity to reflect on ourselves, or we've seen our life in a certain context. We've seen the dukkha, for example, we've seen the pain, the suffering, just the foolishness we can create in our lives, and we can definitely transform that through seeing it clearly. I'm sure we've all given up bad habits. I've certainly done that, and that's what kind of gives us the confidence or the faith to carry on. Because a lot of the time, especially if we project onto a Buddha image in the way of, oh, there's enlightenment out there, or oh, there are these enlightened wise monks, it can seem so daunting. Now, who would ever dream or dare to think that we can walk this path too? We can't just keep projecting outwards. We have this skill, or this faith, or this confidence to be able to say, well, I'm going to do that too. And that's the whole point of, like when the Buddha's teaching the Four Noble Truths, and he says, this noble truth should be fully understood. I've understood it. This noble truth should be abandoned. I've abandoned it. This noble truth should be realized. I've realized it. This fourth noble truth, the path, should be developed. I've developed it. He's saying, I've developed it. You can develop it too. You fully understand it. You abandon it. You realize it. You develop it. The Buddha wasn't sort of teaching the group of 5, and we haven't received this more or less sort of in praise of the Buddha, like, wow. The point is, well, we can do this too. We take it on. So that's the power of that teaching. It's like, I've created these new intentions, these new ways of thinking through right view. Here it is. Go figure. Now then, just to end off a little bit with, we have this wise reflection, we come and take precepts, we've got the structure, the support structure of the monastery now is wonderful. Here you've got Kalyana Mitta, you've got Sangha here, you can go to the Bay Area and find Sangha in the Bay Area, retreats. You've got the Sutta on the highest blessings, even the Buddha's words on loving kindness, very much a kind of step-by-step program for realizing happiness. They're all basically intentions. They're all new inclinations, new aspirations, new ways of thinking. When it comes to meditation, then, is also a really important time to take on this spirit of intentions. This is a very active, creative process, a very emotional process. Unfortunately, it can, and I think very often is, mechanical, dull, dry, whatever. So if we think about all these types of meditations that we do, whether it's mindfulness or breathing, where we actually have guidelines, steps, there's so much of it is about actually inclining our mind in a certain way. And the language the Buddha uses is sikkati. We have to train ourselves. Now, training is also a lot to do with intention. To train yourself is this constant, there's this conscious, volitional, willful taking up of something and following it through, and training, bringing on certain emotions, piti, sukha, bliss, happiness, liberating the mind, freeing the mind, concentrating the mind. Well, we don't like the word concentrating, but as we know, we understand what it means, stilling, bringing it to this establishment, establishing the mind. And then using the breath to think in terms of things like relinquishment, the fading away of craving. These are all ways of thinking. It's very, very creative, as well as being very, very emotional. Emotional, not in the sense of very much to do with your emotions. What is sukha and dukkha? What is piti? What is bliss? These are emotions. And so this is the power or the beauty of intentions, is that, like this morning, Luang Por used the expression, fake it till you make it. And that can have the very negative, cynical sense, say, in society of somebody's trying to be something and they're not, so more or less pretending. It's got this falseness. But actually, if we take it in the positive sense or the good sense of just cultivating or creating something that maybe isn't quite there yet, or consciously bringing it on, there's nothing fake about that. But it's a bit like that. You don't have it, but well, where's it gonna come from? It's gonna come from us somewhere. It's gonna come from within. So it's a sense of create it. If it's not there yet, well, we can create it, bring it on, cultivate it. And so anything as simple as, say, you can try this yourself. This is the power of the mind. A very common example given of, say, setting yourself a time to wake up in the morning before you go to sleep. And you do wake up. Or at least, at the very least, last week we were talking about overcoming laziness. Before you go to sleep, saying, tomorrow morning, I really want to wake up. I really want this. Now I do that. It's not that I'm not going to be tired. I don't pretend I'm not going to be tired. I don't pretend I'm not going to have an adverse reaction to it, or that it's going to be difficult. Yes, I'm going to be tired. Yes, I'm going to be averse to it. Yes, I'm going to be difficult. Yes, I'm going to want to just, press snooze. But at the same time, there's a more powerful intention than all of that. I really want to overcome those things, and actually there's a bigger picture, there's something bigger which I want to be part of. And that, very, very powerful. That can totally overcome all of the negative stuff. Any of us who've given up something which we felt basically really addicted to or totally in the power of, through the power of intention. But again, it's not just a kind of brute will force. This is the point. It's grounded in wisdom. We have to use all these strategies, understanding ourselves, understanding how it works. And then we're able to, bit by bit, put down like new layers, or try and imagine like a tanker, huge, when these are huge, it's not a very beautiful simile, but these ugly oil tankers where they're absolutely massive, cruising around in the oceans. I've heard that they need miles and miles and miles in order to turn or to stop. You have to, it's like there's a momentum there. So it's obviously going to take an effort, but also using our intention, using our wise reflection, using our wisdom faculty. And then when we're doing things, say like when it comes to meditation, thinking, this is a whole new, we're like basically painting, to use another image, painting a whole new picture in our minds. It's really quite amazing that this is what we have. We have the capacity to create a whole new mental image or mental experience. We're the artist, we have the paints, and we're the canvas, and then we're the final admirer. And so with something like the breath, we talk about watching the breath, but it's so much about, we can create different perspectives around it. Again, like different intentions. We're going to listen to the breath, we're going to feel the breath, we're going to experience the breath, we're going to love the breath, all of these kind of things. These create a whole different relationship, a whole different emotional relationship to what we're doing. It's not a physical thing anymore. It's much more of a mental process. So these are just lots of different ways of working with intention and understanding it. But most importantly, the fundamental, the heart, if you like, of it all. The Buddha is saying that Kamma, action, which is what we're doing in our daily life. We talk about actions of body, speech and mind. That the Buddha is saying they're all preceded by some part of the mind. So this is the real heart, the you could say the crux of the matter, or where everything will rise on, is our mind, our state of mind, and what we incline our minds towards. Now, just to end, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the Buddha himself talked about having gone beyond Kamma, gone beyond gone beyond good and bad. One way it's described, the Buddha doesn't do Kamma, just performs actions, just the physical process going on. So people have sometimes often asked, but wasn't the Buddha, he had intentions too, like when he got up and sat down and decided to speak, and the Buddha did things out of great compassion. Those are intentions or motivations. So it's like, well, yes, well, there you go. So these are the different layers, you could say. So intentionality to do things, yes, on one level you could see that, or the Buddha or the enlightened mind still doing things deliberately as opposed to accidentally, and also motivated on to do good and to help, motivated out of welfare for sentient beings. But what it's pointing to is that more on the level of delusion, having totally gone beyond that sense of a being there. So on the delusion level, that there's no one actually there to be doing any of these actions. So it's more of a use of language. We're talking about a whole different mode of being, where the enlightened mind no longer perceives a being in that process, when there's just a process, so none of these terms apply in the same way. Yet nevertheless, you could say the Buddha's doing things out of welfare and compassion. And so again, this is not something which we should ignore, because we can also see this in our daily lives. The more and more we go on, because we are growing in wholesome states, we are walking the path and learning things. So there's less and less of that sense of forced, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, now the here and there. There's this sense, more and more a sense of the process becoming more and more natural, to a point where you can actually then let go of your intentions. Yet things still happen. We don't have to think anymore, oh, I'm going to do this, no, I'm going to offer the meal, no, I'm going to do this. Or with our monks' rules, it's the same. At first you have to make a real point. I'm going to keep this rule, I'm going to keep that rule, I better not do this, I better not do that. And in time you internalize it, and it becomes basically how your expression of how you live your life. It becomes becomes natural. Or like I was thinking of a simile as I was walking down. I'm always trying to think of how do we see these things playing out in our daily life. So I was coming down. So when you're up there in your hut, there's a lot you have to do basically. If the goal is to get down, and you have to get down at 5:30 for tea, you've got to do this, got to do that, you've got to close the windows, blah, 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 go to the toilet, pack up. Then you've got to walk, and you've got to choose, am I going to do the forest trail, am I going to go down the road, I've got to swing by the mud to get some stuff. There's a lot to do with coming down. And then as you're going down, you're still going down, you're still heading to the goal, but in a sense all the intentions around it are dropping away. You're just more or less going through the motions at that point. You've set the thing in play with your intentions, and the thing's playing out. Then by the time you get to the Buddha image, the shrine there on the hill, just at the top of the steps, there's hardly any intention left at all. You don't have to think, oh, okay, go down the steps, and then go in, and have to. I mean, where are you going to go at that point? I'm not going to go back up the hill, and I'm not just going to stop there. It's like it's a natural process. So again, just to think, there's this beautiful image of stream entry, which is something which I know is not to talk about in terms of being too specific about it, but just as a thought, just as an image, that notion of flowing along, and as you flow along and really being in the stream, then it takes on a natural process. You don't have to put effort anymore. So I think, again, pointing to why did the Buddha use this kind of evocative language, this very beautiful language, natural language, because it spoke to people. People could understand, first you have to strive, first you make intentions, first you have to work sila, and you have to do this, do that. But as you internalize these things, then more and more of what's wholesome becomes clear, and what's unwholesome is abandoned, and then simply doesn't arise, less and less. Whether it's metta, at first you spread metta, you cultivate metta, you work with compassion, you change yourself, try and get free from anger. and then in the end it becomes much more your natural expression. And you don't need to cultivate metta when you get angry, because you basically don't get angry anymore. So just say a few words today on something which I feel very passionate about. It's through learning bit by bit. Is the beautiful heart of the Buddha's teachings. What really makes it special is that it gives us this power of intention, create our life, basically, write the story of our life, and then read it and live it out. So I'll offer those words this evening, our observance evening.